Hello friends, today we are going to discuss the nature and characteristics of medieval Indian political thought. The medieval Indian political thought describes the thought process of different philosophers on various issues like state, society, law obedience, and legitimacy. The medieval Indian political thought, in fact, challenged the social inequalities, and economic inequalities. Particularly, the Indian medieval thought, in fact, used religion as a tool to propagate reform against social and economic inequalities. So, Indian medieval thought challenged the social and economic inequalities in Indian society. As we all know, that Indian society has been experiencing the Varna system, caste system, and subcaste system. And this has led to social divisions in the society. And the upper sections of the society, the upper caste of the society, have been showing a kind of humiliating experiences towards the downtrodden classes in Indian society. So that's how the entire caste system and Varna system and subcaste system, on the one hand, made social divisions in the society. On the other hand, make the lives of the depressed sections very humiliating with social evils like untouchability, Jogini system, and Baswini system. So this is how Indian medieval thought, in fact, has chosen religion as a tool to challenge the social and economic inequalities in the society. Medieval thought, in fact, is a thought that describes about the thought process of various philosophers on various issues like state, society, law obedience, and legitimacy. So it has challenged the social equalities, social inequalities, and economic inequalities. That's the second important aspect. And the medieval political thought, not only in India, but in Western societies, Arabian societies, the European societies, medieval political thought used religion as a tool to propagate the reform. So that using religion as a tool is an important characteristic of medieval political thought. Now let us discuss briefly about human history. If you want to understand the medieval societies, we need to understand the human history and its evolution very briefly. Human history is classified into two types, the prehistory and history. The prehistory consists of three ages. That's called as prehistoric periods. One is the Paleolithic age, that's also called as Old Stone Age. The second one is Neolithic age or New Stone Age. The third one is Metal Age, that's called the Bronze Age and Iron Age. They are called as the prehistoric ages because the civilizations and human beings did not know reading and writing, and they could not make their experiences in writing. That's why this age is called as prehistoric age. The sources of prehistoric age are the human inhabitations, caves, and the material that these people used, like bones, stones, and various other things. So on the basis of that, various narrations have come about Paleolithic experiences, Neolithic experiences, Bronze Age and Iron Age experiences. Paleolithic age is believed to have been started some 5 lakhs years back, and it continued for about 4.5 years. That's an age where human beings lived on the basis of stones. By using stones, human beings have met their livelihood. There is no art of agriculture. It was only a food gathering stage. Human beings did not know about production. Then comes the Neolithic age. The Neolithic age has come to know about the age of agriculture, age of fire, age of cooking. So that's why there is a call of Neolithic revolution. And this revolution has revolutionized the usage of the agriculture, the invention of agriculture, usage of fire, and other things have made human beings settle down in certain areas and human inhabitations. That's called the Neolithic age. This Neolithic age is believed to have been started some 20,000 years back. After that, we have Metal Age. Metal Age consists of Bronze Age and Iron Age. The Metal Age is an age of copper. Copper mixed with tin is called as bronze. So Metal Age was started. First copper was invented. Later iron was invented. So this Metal Age also lasts for 10,000 years. So after that, we have human beings with civilizations. We have so many civilizations throughout the world, like Indus Valley civilization in India, Chinese civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the Sumerian civilization, the Akkadian civilization, the Aztec civilization. So these are various civilizations that flourished throughout India in ancient history. So this is called as historic period. Human beings come to know about reading and writing. The script was invented. So human history again divided into three periods. One is ancient period, second one is medieval period, a third one is modern period. So the periods of human civilizations are called as ancient history, and ancient history comes up to 6th century AD in the first millennium. So in which we can see so many civilizations flourishing, like Indus Valley civilization in India, Egyptian civilization, Sumerian civilization, Akkadian civilization, Aztec civilization. So these civilizations flourished. Like Greek civilization, Chinese civilization were also there. So the flourishing of these civilizations mark the ancient history. In fact, ancient history also is a history of discoveries, inventions, history of architecture, history of a new transport system. So ancient history also has done its bit for the growth of human civilization. In India also, ancient history has a long role it has played, and this has primarily consisted of the history of Indus Valley civilization. And of course, there are also ancient kingdoms in India. So the ancient history can be described up to the history of events up to 6th century AD of the first millennium. And after that, from 7th century to 13th century, we have the medieval period. Now we are concerned about the medieval political thought. So we should know the dates of the medieval period. The history between 7th century to 13th century, which was mostly religious societies. Almost all the societies of the world during medieval period are influenced by one religion or the other. In India, we have Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sufism, Parsism, and likewise in Western societies we have Christianity, and in West Asian societies we have Islam. So this is our medieval society. A societies between 7th century AD to 13th century AD are described as the medieval societies, where the societies were influenced more by religious doctrines, religious principles, religious pretexts. So this is called as medieval history. After that, we have modern history from 14th century onwards to the present day. But some people describe modern history from the advent of Britishers in 17th century to the present day. But Westerners have classified history from 14th century to the present century as the modern history. Now in today's lesson plan, we'll be discussing about the ancient India, the medieval Indian political thought and its characteristics. We have a lesson plan here. First of all, we should know the medieval societies and their features. So there are certain unique features that differentiate between the societies of ancient India and the societies of modern India. So medieval societies have certain unique features, and that made certain philosophers to rise up to the occasion and express their views on various matters related to the state, society, legitimacy, kingdom, law obedience, and various other things. So first of all, we must know about the medieval societies and their features. After that, we should know the names of certain philosophers who have expressed their feelings, expressed their ideas, philosophical ideas and doctrines in various academic and religious works. These political philosophers are of three types, basically: political philosophers, religious philosophers, and social philosophers. And some of the philosophers have conglomerated all their views, political views, religious views, and social views in their works. They have not made any watertight division of the views, but all the views are expressed in the same document or a book. So this is how political, religious, and social philosophers of medieval period also to be known in this lesson. After that, the characteristics of medieval political philosophy. We should know about the characteristics of medieval political thought. So in fact, that is the crux of our lesson. We should know about the characteristics of the medieval political philosophy based on the features of medieval societies. First of all, we should know about the features of medieval societies. And after that, we'll be knowing about the characteristics of medieval political philosophy. Then we'll make an evaluation of different strands of political philosophy, and what is their orientation? Is it community orientation? Is it state orientation? Is it individual-centric orientation? So we'll make an analysis of different strands. After that, we'll make a critical evaluation. So this is how our lesson goes on. First, we must know the Indian medieval societies and their features. As we all know, medieval societies are the societies from 7th century AD to 13th century AD. We have already earmarked the timings. According to some historians, it is the medieval age starts from 7th century AD to 13th century AD. That means the first half of the second half of first millennium to the first half of second millennium. So this is called as the medieval age. The medieval societies have certain important features. The first one is it has social divisions in the societies. In fact, Indian society, as we all know, is experiencing a functional division of society based on Chaturvarna system, caste system, sub-caste system, and that has also led to subsequent social evils like untouchability, Jogini system, Basavani system. So this is how there is a horizontal and vertical division of society into various social castes, social groupings like sub-caste, castes, and varnas. As we all know, Indian society is divided into a fourfold division of varna system. That's called as the Chaturvarna system. The Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Shudras, and Vaishyas and Shudras. These are the four divisions of society, which are in turn again divided into various hundreds and thousands of castes and subcastes. So this is how there are so many social cleavages or divisions, and these divisions are based on functional representation of people. The social divisions is a peculiar feature of Indian society, which we cannot find in anywhere in any society of the world. So social divisions based on caste system is an important and unique feature of Indian society in general, medieval Indian society in particular. This is first thing. Secondly, there is there was a kind of religious orthodoxy. There was religious orthodoxy in Indian society. There were so many religions in Indian society, like Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, Parsism, Sufism. There are so many religions, Sikhism. And among the religions, again, there are two groups. One is the priestly group and the other one is commoner group. So there has always been religious orthodoxy. And religion has prescribed certain watertight rules and regulations for the living patterns of the people. So this religious orthodoxy is evident in Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Buddhism, Sufism, Sikhism, and all other religions that were prevalent in Indian society. So religious orthodoxy, in fact, religious orthodoxy has led to parallel cultures. One culture led by the royal families, the other one led by the common people. So that has led to the predominant cultures, the parallel cultures, that's royal culture and people's culture. The royal culture was always supported by the state and its institutions, the upper caste in the society. And the people's culture was mostly followed by the depressed sections, the exploited sections, the common people of the society, or the Chaturvarnas, or the fourth category of the Chaturvarna system, the Shudras. So this is how there is a kind of a parallel culture. One is the royal culture, the other one is people's culture. This is also a predominant feature. This is seen as a result of the religious orthodoxy. While the royal culture consisting of precepts with orthodoxical principles, the people's culture is very flexible and with the ever cooperating nature of people among themselves, both in social livelihood and also in the cultural sector. And medieval societies have political empires and kingdoms. India was not unified at that point of time. North India was ruled by some kingdoms and South India was ruled by some other kingdoms. There were political empires and kingdoms. The Chalukyas, Rashtrakutas, Pallavas, Hoysalas. Of course, Muhammad Ghazni, Muhammad Ghori, Slave dynasty, Khilji dynasty, Tughlaqs, Sayyid and Lodi dynasty. So this is how medieval Indian society was divided into various political empires and kingdoms. This is an important and unique feature of Indian society. And in the latter period of medieval societies, we can also see the rise of provincial kingdoms like Malwas, Vijayanagara kingdoms, Suluva and Tuluva, Sangama dynasties. So this is how we see there are so many kingdoms in the Indian society, particularly in the medieval society. In Telangana society, we can see the Kakatiyas based at Warangal. So this is also a medieval political empire. So political empires and kingdoms, the existence of political empires and kingdoms is also another important feature of Indian medieval societies. North India was led by almost Muslim rulers and South India was led by the Vijayanagara, Saluva, Tuluva, Sangama dynasties and various other dynasties. Indian medieval society also has an experience of feudalism. Feudalism denotes land owning patterns. The upper caste in the society used to own thousands of acres of land, hundreds of acres of land. Human dignity and self-respect are bestowed only to the person owning a land, a piece of land. The quantum of land decides the quantum of respect that a person receives from the society. So land is an attribute for getting self-respect, for getting dignity, royalty in the society. So that's why feudalism. In fact, the word feudalism is derived from a word feud, means land. So existence of large land gentry and who are having thousands of acres of land owning classes. There are also hundreds of acres of land owning classes. And likewise, the land owning patterns are such that the land was concentrated in the hands of the prosperous people and rich people. That has led to economic inequalities in the society. In fact, the medieval society economy was mostly based on two sectors. One is agriculture and second one is services. The service sector is basically a professional service sector based on traditional services in the village system, like washermen, goldsmiths, silversmiths, blacksmiths, carpenter, plumbers, likewise. And there is also land owning classes and landless laborers. So this is how there is a system of economic inequalities. The economic inequalities are reinforced by the system of land owning pattern. The land owning pattern has led to economic inequalities, and this has resulted in economic exploitation also. So there was so much of economic exploitation that poor people are perpetually exploited by the prosperous sections of the society. This is also an important feature of medieval Indian society. And likewise, there are also patterns of social and economic dominance. The social dominance is due to the caste system, and of course there is also gender. All the societies, right from north to extreme south, the society, Indian society was predominantly a male-dominated society. That's called as patriarchal society. A patriarchal society where human dignity was only confined more to the male people and less to the women, and women were treated with the second-grade treatment. Women were humiliated. There were atrocities. There were also certain social evils based on gender, like sati, child marriages, and various other things, and forced widowhood. These are also the results of the social division of society and patriarchy. And likewise, there is also economic dominance. In the patterns of dominance, we have social dominance as well as economic dominance. The economic dominance is mostly due to the existence of feudalism in Indian society. So that's why the patterns of social and economic dominance is also an important feature of Indian medieval societies. And the society has religious primacy, and religious superstitions were there, blind faiths were there, and they are marked by irrationalism. That's why these societies are very often referred as dark age societies, where human innovation, reasonableness, discovery are not prevalent in these societies due to the wide range of religious superstitions, blind faiths, and irrationalism. So Indian societies marked by these features. And now let us see who are the philosophers that belong to this medieval period. In fact, these philosophers have vehemently opposed the inequalities in the societies in their writings. Some of the philosophers have challenged the social and economic system, which perpetuates social inequalities and economic inequalities. In the Bhakti movement, we have, in North India, we have Kabir Das, Tulsidas, Guru Nanak, Mirabai, and likewise in South India, we have Andal, Nayanars, Alvars, and also in Punjab, we have Guru Nanak. So these are the philosophers belong to Bhakti movement. The Bhakti movement is from 7th century to 9th century. This Bhakti movement has risen as a revolt against the social and economic exploiting nature of the society. They have challenged the social norms that reinforce the social exploitation and economic exploitation. And these writings of the Bhakti movement poets and philosophers have centered around the human dignity and self-respect. So Bhakti movement is seen as a protest movement against the social and economic patterns of dominance and their exploitative nature. And besides Bhakti movement, there are also notable philosophers like Basava. Basava is a philosopher, belongs to South India, Karnataka, and he himself has given a new religious cult like Veerashaivism, Lingayat and Vakalinga cults. Basava has established Veerashaivism. And there is also an Islamic philosopher called Ziauddin Barani. Ziauddin Barani has written books to strengthen the state power and to strengthen the sovereign power of the state. So this is medieval political philosophy. Philosophers particularly, on the one hand, they have challenged the social and economic patterns of dominance and their exploitative nature. On the other hand, they have also advocated certain reforms for establishing a correct social order in the society. Now let us see the characteristic features of the medieval political philosophy. The characteristics of medieval political philosophy. First one is, these philosophies made by the philosophy of Basava or Ziauddin Barani. These philosophies, Ziauddin Barani and Basava, particularly these two philosophers have considered politics as a branch of history and theology. There is no autonomy to politics, and politics was considered as a branch to history and theology. So that means it was a part of the religious studies, theology. Theology means study of religion. A systematic study of religions is called theology. So politics was also considered as a part of history and theology. That's one thing. Second thing, they give primacy of religion over politics. In fact, religion and politics are intertwined, where politics was always seen as a branch of religion. As I have in the first point we are discussing, politics is a branch of theology. That means primacy of religion over politics. These philosophers have advocated that the kings and rulers should adhere to the religious precepts and religious practices to establish themselves with legitimacy among the population. So the primacy of religion over politics is an important characteristics of medieval political thought. This political thought has emphasized that religion should prevail over politics and politics should be guided by religion. If we find a kind of separation of religion and politics in modern period, in medieval period, there is a conjunction of religion and politics. There is an intermix of religion and politics in medieval political philosophy. Whereas in modern philosophy, there is a clear separation of religion and politics. Thereby you attain autonomy to the state, government and various political institutions in modern period. But that autonomy was not available in the medieval period. So medieval period was influenced mostly by religion. So under the shade of religious influence, politics were studied and politics were understood. And the political philosophers also advocated political ideas and thought in accordance with the prevailing religious precepts and practices. So that means there's a primacy of religion over politics. This is a second important aspect of the medieval political philosophy. And thirdly, the medieval political philosophy was state-centric. They discussed about state, they discussed about the king, the qualities of king, the functions of king. Here we see a kind of analogy between the ancient Indian philosophy and medieval philosophy. Both these philosophies have discussed state as a reference point and the origin of state, the functions of state, the nature of state, the structure of state, the state and its legitimacy, the state aggrandizement. So this is how all the political ideas and views are discussed. With state as a center, this is called a state-centric philosophy. So state-centric philosophy has given less importance to the individual. There is no discussion hardly about the individual liberty, equality, fraternity, justice that we see in modern period. But in medieval period and ancient period, it was only state-centric philosophy. So it wanted to strengthen the state system. It suggested more and more advices to the king, how to make the king very effective and functional. So that's why it is called a state-centric philosophy. And they also give more opinions and views on statecraft. Who should be selected as ministers? What are the qualifications of higher officials in the state? How states should collect their revenues, revenue administration, judicial administration, financial administration, and various other things. And how state maintains its political independence in the comity of other states. What could be its foreign policy? How a war can be won by the king. So that's how the philosophy of medieval political thought is basically state-centric, and it widens its sphere by discussing its various aspects of statecraft in its form. This is an important aspect. And in the thick of the state-centric ideas, it also suggested reform thought. In fact, the Indian medieval political thought has given reforms. It has propagated reforms like social reform, economic reform, and political reform. As we all know, one of the noted Indian philosophers belongs to medieval period, Basava. Basava has suggested an institution called Anubhava Mantapa. In this Anubhava Mantapa, he wanted the people to come together and discuss the matters of social and economic nature, and they should come to conclusion. They should resolve themselves the crisis that is occurring frequently in the society. So it's how he has suggested a kind of political reform by including people's participation as a very active element and dynamic element in the political system. So this is how medieval political thought has given rise to reform thought. It has suggested reforms, economic reforms. For example, Ziauddin Baraki has suggested the king should see to it that economic exploitation should not be there, and he should control the market, and he should fix the prices for certain consumable commodities. So this is how economic reforms, social reforms, political reforms are very widely discussed as part of the politics of the society. So characteristics of medieval philosophy, political philosophy, has reform thought as its integral part. It has also suggested democratic reforms, socialistic reforms during the medieval times itself. In fact, in Basava's political philosophy, we see Kayaka and Dasoha. These are the two important concepts. In the Kayaka, he says everybody should be industrious and everybody should be prosperous and everybody should contribute their economic might for the prosperity of the state. And he has lamented the laziness among the people, and he has motivated the people for productivity in the society. And likewise, he also suggested law obedience, citizens' obedience towards the state, citizens' obedience to the law, king. So that's how the reform thought has sown the seeds for the prospective foundations of democracy in Indian society during the medieval times itself. So it is a consequence of the prevailing social evils like untouchability, social divisions, economic exploitation, the existence of religious orthodoxy like Basavini system, Jogini system. So as a protest against these practices, the medieval political philosophy has brought a reform thought. It wanted to reform the society, reform the social order, reform the economic system, reform the cultural plurality of the society, retain the cultural plurality of the society. So a reform thought is considered as an integral part of the medieval political thought. And after that, the medieval political thought also dealt with the questions of legitimacy of rulers. And some philosophers have suggested that the king should perpetually engage himself in wars, thereby a victorious king always be legitimate, viewed as legitimate king, legitimate leader from the people. Some philosophers like Ziauddin Baraki has suggested that a king draws legitimacy from the public by constantly involving himself in wars with neighboring kingdoms, and thereby king himself becomes victorious so that he can draw a larger amounts of legitimacy from the people. But on the other hand, there are philosophers like Basava who suggested that the king can draw legitimacy from the social and economic intervention into the lives of the poor people and destitutes by undertaking social welfare, economic welfare, and various other matters. So questions of legitimacy of the rulers, the sources of legitimacy, and the process of drawing legitimacy are also discussed in medieval political philosophy. So if we see these characteristics, we can easily come to a conclusion. There were three strands in the medieval political thought. The first one is community orientation. So this political thought wanted to reform the Indian society with a community orientation. Community orientation means it wanted to establish social equality in the society, social justice. It made a protest against the social division of society. And it has also lamented the social evils like untouchability, male domination in the society. And it suggested equal treatment of men and women, equal treatment of all the classes of the society with dignity and self-respect. So this is all called as community orientation. Secondly, the medieval political thought also provides individuals' moral orientation. In fact, Basava's philosophy, if you could look into Basava's philosophy, it says that individual should be independent, he should be productive, he should contribute himself to the society. Unless he is a workaholic or contribute his might through some production, he cannot draw his respect from the society. So that's the very concept of Kayaka. He has motivated the people, an individual, towards the work culture. So it's an individual moral orientation given by Basava. So likewise, medieval philosophers have stressed upon the need to be independent with self-respect and dignity by not depending on other people, either for livelihood or for social respect or for economic survival or any other thing. So moral orientation and individual orientation is also another important stand. And thirdly, the medieval political thought has also stressed upon sovereignty and state-centric nature. And it wanted to make the state a vibrant institution, a personification of moral values, religious values. And some people considered the state as an instrument to establish a religious order in the society. So it wanted, the more medieval political thought wanted the state to be a judge for establishing a religious social order in the society. It wanted the king to play a particular role so that the concept of justice or dharma cannot be deviated, and the king should reinforce the concept of dharma in the society. So that means medieval political thought has strengthened the institution of king with suggestions to improve his, to maintain his sovereignty so that he can draw legitimacy from the people. So this is how there are three broad important trends that we find in medieval political thought. One is the community orientation, which suggested a kind of reform in the society to establish a just and equitable social order. And secondly, motivating the individual with moral orientation on work culture and productivity. And third one is strengthening the state, obedient to the king, so that the sovereignty of the state should be strengthened. So these are the three important strands that we find in medieval Indian political thought. So if we critically evaluate the medieval political thought, one thing that is certain, that is a primacy of religion over politics. And wherever you see, not only just in India, Western societies or Arabian societies, or for that matter, the Indian societies in particular, we can see the religious influence on politics and the conjunction of religion and politics is very much evident. And secondly, the medieval Indian political thought came as a protest against social and economic inequalities. It wanted a just social order with dignity and self-respect, and it wanted an equitable society without any exploitation, and it wanted a society with equal status. That's called an egalitarian society. So medieval political thought, though it has established a primacy over the religion, it has certainly sowed the seeds for the prospective modern philosophy with its reform orientation, state-centric orientation, and also its community orientation. So these are some of the important aspects of medieval philosophy. So in the next class, we'll be discussing about Basava and Ziauddin Baraki. In fact, Basava is a philosopher influenced by Hinduism, and Ziauddin Baraki was influenced by the Islamic precepts. So the primacy of religion over politics is very much evident in these writings of these two philosophers. Thank you, friends. Thank you very much.